Brought to you by Telehelping, a virtual assistant staffing company for professionals.
Hello, everyone. My name is Cody Hall. I am the host of The Faces, Entrepreneurs Are People Too, and the founding CEO of Telehelping, a virtual staffing organization. Quick shout out to today's sponsor, Parallax AI. It's an AI legal assistant just for you and your organization who allows you quick turnaround your documents with the trust that you can approve from a stamping lawyer. This way, you don't have to use things like ChatGPT. I'm guilty of it too, people. I do it all the time. ChatGPT is not a lawyer. So check out Parallax. They'll give you 10% off for mentioning the Faces podcast. Sir, how are you doing today this morning?
Doing well. Yeah, thanks for
Cory,
having me.
I'm excited to have you, sir. I always enjoy folks who maybe think they're not interesting people, right? So that's what this podcast is about. It's about talking to the lawyers, the accountants, and the finance people. And so, Cory, let's tell people who we're chatting with here today. Who is Cory Frank?
Yeah. No, thanks. Yeah, so I guess the best way to describe me is I'm an ex 22-year banker. So that really defined my young career. I'm also a father of 3 great kids, and then also have a lovely wife here in Charlotte, North Carolina. Um, but I guess the last 2 years or so, I've basically completely changed my career, and now I'm a CEO of a fintech startup. So, and I can go into more background, but that's the gist
Well,
of it.
first and foremost, I'm from Charlotte. And so
Okay, that's funny. I didn't know that.
I lived in Charlotte, grew up in Pineville for a while before
Yeah,
Ballantyne was even a thing.
yeah,
Uh, when I moved out with my grandmother to Ballantyne with my brothers, they were just getting rid of all the original cornfields and everything out there. So
hmm
Ballantyne Commons wasn't even a parkway yet. It was just a road.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I grew up in Florida most of my life, but I moved here in 2000. So I guess I've been here 25 years now. So it's
Yeah.
yeah, there's
I
been a
moved
lot of change.
there
And
I think I moved there in 2002, 2003.
okay,
So yeah, no, love Charlotte. Went to school there. Went to UNCC
yeah,
after the military. So Charlottean, lived all
yeah.
over the place, even Concord for a while. So as an adult.
Yeah, it's a
So
great
that's a
city
great,
to raise a family. It's, it's not, it's not so large and crazy like a New York
yeah,
or
no.
LA or something, but it's also, large enough where it has everything: sports, restaurants, bars.
And it has a brewery for every taste.
Yes.
I've yet to see a city with more breweries. The whole entire South End is
Yeah.
might as well be a stout. It was a pouring of beer. Every corner has a different
Yeah.
brewery of some flavor, depending on whatever you like.
Yeah.
That's pretty great.
Yeah,
And
it's been
so,
great.
Corey, you say a banker, and I think the banker phrase is a very broad, ambiguous based phrase. And
Yeah.
so, what in banking did you do?
Yeah, so my career is probably broader than most. So I joined what was then First Union, actually June of 2000. And I was a leverage finance analyst. So basically joined the bank as a junior investment banker. Straight out of college. And then I guess funny enough, about 6 months after I joined, the tech and telecom blow up happened. And
Blow
so
up.
I actually moved shortly thereafter into the loan workout group, which I didn't know even existed. Most people, still don't know what that means. But for large corporate banks, when their large corporate loans start to deteriorate or the customer's having problems, they basically transfer those loans into a specialized group that helps to work out the loans and tries to basically craft a solution that's both good for the borrower and good for the bank, so the
Mm,
bank doesn't lose money. Um,
that makes
so that was a
sense.
great experience. I tell people that that's that's probably the best path in terms of learning corporate credit, to see what happens when things go bad. Then right, you
Yeah.
can underwrite for really all range of of outcomes. But to fast forward, so I started my career as an investment banker. I then joined the high yield sales and trading desk, uh, and was there for a couple of years. And then I actually moved out of what would be considered the broader investment bank into corporate treasury. And I worked in a group that basically helped to buy and sell companies for the bank itself. So this was actually after First Union became Wachovia. After that merger, and that was an extremely interesting group because you basically get to understand how um, corporate M&A works, which is similar to investment banking, but you're working for the bank itself as opposed to external clients. So I
So
always
you
tell people,
were
oh,
were
sorry, go
you
ahead.
with Wachovia the day that they couldn't open their doors? Because being from Charlotte, right? You
Yeah,
you knew this was an event for us. Like the Wachovia throws up on their doors.
yeah,
We can't open today, and if it wasn't for Wells Fargo swooping in,
yeah.
it would have been a bad day for many people. So were you there when that took place? You were still with Wachovia?
I was, yeah. So if you want to learn more about that story, I'm glad to tell it. So just going back for a second. So in corporate development, again, it's normally there to help, right, kind of buy and sell divisions, and we did write a few M&A deals. But to your point, that then morphed into the 2008 financial crisis. And
Yeah.
so what what our roles were at that point was really to try to help basically put out fires that were occurring across the bank. And basically because of our background, several of us actually in that group also came from the loan workout area. And so we had experience in working in kind of difficult, situations that
Yeah.
aren't playing out as expected. So for example, we would work on, various investment funds that the bank had a relationship with that are, that were having trouble. We also helped to create a plan on, if the bank had to, how could we raise capital or how could we raise liquidity if we had to
Mm,
start selling off some divisions. And ultimately, to your point, um, I actually worked on all the modeling for all the potential deals. And
mm,
so, um, you know, Wachovia got to the point where there was some trouble at the bank, although I think the perceived trouble was probably worse than what it was in reality. But you also have to remember, right, this was post, Lehman Brothers going bankrupt. This is post Bear Stearns being sold quickly, over a weekend to JP Morgan. And so, um, that was a long answer to your question, but the answer was yes. I actually had like a front row seat to what
yeah.
was happening. It's both an exciting time. It's a stressful time. Ironically, as you look back, I actually have more memories about what most people would view as a crazy, stressful time, right, than I do about my normal, right, kind of day to day work there. Um, but it was a very interesting role, and because of that, I actually got to work with fairly senior people. So, we were presenting the modeling output to the CFO and the treasurer. My manager would go to the board meetings to talk about the options, and so that was a great opportunity as well. At that time I was kind of a mid-level banker, you know I guess basically like a vice president. So great experience for someone who's still whatever at that time,
A-
right, not
And
even 10
that's
years
what
out of college. And I
I want to
can,
dial in on, Corey,
yeah.
because I think that you provide such an interesting perspective that our listeners could, most of which are, in their mid to late 20s. Our bell curve would be somewhere around 29, 30 for the people
Hmm.
who follow us, and most of which have never experienced a financial crisis, right?
Yeah,
They were in 2008, they were, sub 10 years old, right?
yeah,
Some they were infants. They don't remember what it was like. I was in the Marine Corps, right? And so for me, there wasn't a financial crisis because unless the government failed, I was getting paid every 2 weeks,
yeah,
right? But you went through the dot-com bubble. in banking,
Mhm.
right? And then you went through the financial crisis in banking with a
Correct.
company that was in distress.
Right.
So I think it'd be really great to paint from your perspective, like, you're just talking just now, like, hey, I have memories of like really difficult times that actually were good for me because I was a mid-level banker, like working almost outside the door of the board of
Yep.
a multi-billion dollar organization. And so, you know, talk to us about how that was navigating it and kind of maybe like, saying, hey, I took an opportunity to see this from a positive perspective. When the world was burning around me, I
Yeah.
was able to bite my teeth. Right.
Yeah. I mean, if you take a step back, there's basically multiple dynamics happening at once. So, I ironically, about 3 weeks before, the market had a complete meltdown, I actually had just purchased my first house. And so we were living in a condo, and my wife and I, were excited. I just purchased our first home. In hindsight, you probably could have said, "Oh, there were some signs that probably wasn't the smartest move at the time," but we could afford it. But to the point of kind of the craziness that was happening, um, I actually got pulled into work, and at the very end, I was literally working 15, 16-hour days, 3 weeks straight. And so I actually couldn't even move. I couldn't even help my wife move into the house. So she actually had to call
Mm,
some friends and help. And so it just speaks to, you know, the, um, the heightened risk that was occurring that I basically I was trying to help to save the bank. And our whole
yeah.
group was trying to find a partner that would be a good merger partner. Now, in hindsight, once you get older and have a family, you probably realize, well, I maybe didn't have to work that hard during the time. But it was something where, and this is probably something that I may have kind of a unique gift, which is the ability to kind of compartmentalize. And so you basically, would put the fact that your 401k is going down 40% to the side, or the fact that um your wife your life is very busy at the time. And I couldn't have done it without my wife and the strength there of being super supportive for me. And the last kind of super ironic part is, um we knew that we would likely merge with somebody, and we were working with multiple merger partners at once, right? Some of which is not public and has never been made public. And then the ironic thing is the group actually, I remember, the entire group sitting back one night. It was like 1 a.m, and we realized, you know what, we're going to merge with another bank or, right, financial institution. Because of our position, they likely were going to be the buyer. And we're like, wait a second, they're going to have a corporate development group just like we do. And there's a good chance that we're going to get canned at the end of this.
Yeah.
But even that, you basically had to put it aside and say, it doesn't matter. My job now is to do what we're doing, and our job is to find a good merger partner, and basically try to model out, the pro forma capital and the earnings and all that, to make sure that combined company, would be viable. And so, you know, to your point on a little bit, maybe in terms of advice, is at that time you weren't working for yourself, right? You were working for the firm, you were working for the fellow employees. And I understand it was a bit unique, but you're really working for Charlotte too, right? You're hoping that you
Yeah.
can find a good strong partner, because if the bank would have failed completely, right, it would have been devastating for Charlotte.
Oh, Corey, that's actually a really good perspective. And I think that's when you're sitting there trying to do so much, it's easy to think about yourself, right? And so, like, wow, what does this mean for me? But um, Wachovia was a big player, right? Credit unions everywhere, ATMs everywhere, and just I have, my grandmother was sitting there saying she was freaking out because she's a Wachovia person,
Uh-huh.
and she's like, "Wow, I have more in my account than the FDIC is going to reimburse me for." And she's was freaking out because she could have lost all of that, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's it's honorable too to think about like what would this have done to Charlotte, because I remember, as people we grew up on the same street, who dads lost their job and they had to, they end up taking jobs across the country, right? That were nowhere near what they were making in their investment banking job in Charlotte,
Yeah.
right? It was a tough time, but and I think that's a great perspective to have because folks like me who run smaller and medium sized companies, right? When things like this hit us, it's like, what do I have to do for the company, right? I owned a healthcare company, and there was a period of time there, probably about 4 or 5 months, where I was paying everyone's salary from
Mm,
my own personal bank account
yeah.
because one of our investors, one of our PE companies, went belly up. They didn't have the capital to give us the money for our different tranches
Hmm.
during a development phase. We were pre-revenue at the time. And I was like, oh, okay. So I'm like putting a ton of
That's
money
tough.
into this company every month. I was like, wow, I hope I get paid back for this. And so I think I barely got paid back in the
Yeah.
long run. But it was just one of those things where he's like, there's so many people who rely on me. I have to make decisions that are far beyond your own
Yeah.
world.
Yeah. I mean, and again, that's very honorable. And as a small business owner, the buck really stops with you. There's really no one else when it's all said and done. So, that is a key difference of, our current firm now, that I co-founded and the CEO versus a large corporation. You at least know that there's some level of backstop and some level of stability. Even as our bank was in trouble, you still knew that even at that time was really too big to completely fail, and so you knew the vast majority of the jobs and the people were still going to be there. And to be honest, there's good, smart people in almost all those banks,
Yeah.
and even when the banks did get in trouble, I th- m- and again, I understand that my view may be jaded given where I came from, but the vast majority of people are good, smart, hardworking people. They're trying to do the right thing, and
Yeah.
they're really just trying to help the customer. And there's certain instances, usually driven by bubbles, right? To be tech and telecom bubble or the housing bubble, that ultimately get the banks in trouble. But they're generally trying to do the right thing. And so I knew that, or at least my view was that, even if we merged with someone who would likely, you know, decrease the total size of our group, that, just going back to your question on, what advice would I give? I still felt comfortable because I knew that I was pretty good at my role and I was adding value. So as
Mm.
long as you can add value in a large corporation above, right, your pace scale, then it's highly likely that, right, you can find a different role. So and that was one thing that was nice about Wachovia. You could move different groups relatively easily, and as long as you were adding value, then you could make a very long career there.
No. And I did a smaller version of M&A for a medical group. And I'd go around purchasing practices
Hmm.
from docs that were retiring.
Yeah.
And that's never come up conversation. Most of the time we walk into a practice, everyone had worked there 15 plus years. And they're saying the practice manager's sitting here like, well, if they have a regional manager who managed everything, am I going to have my job? And so it's like those things where people are going to lose their job, but you just kind of have to like, yeah, no, it's going to be okay. Let's just
Yeah.
walk out this door together. And so, you just kind of have to keep charging forward, right? But it's interesting, talking about how they differ from the big banks to where you're at now. Talk to me about your current firm.
Yeah. No, thanks. Yeah. So both myself and two co-founders, Britt and Rakesh, we started um, Robora Financial, I guess about a year and a half ago now. And uh, so I know the name sounds strange, but Robora, at least one version of it, is Latin for encourage. And so we really built the company to try to help people optimize their deposits. Most of our customers are small businesses and middle market businesses, but the short version is, we help companies, again, right, optimize their cash, and we do that by basically linking to their current account, and then we allow customers to set a target balance inside their current operating account. And we basically just sweep those funds back and forth each week. And so on the
Mm,
one hand, they can earn a higher yield by moving to the high yield savings account that we open on their behalf. And then we also make sure that we can move it back in time to cover payments. And so what you'll find is a lot of small and medium businesses just don't have the time or the knowledge to to optimize their funds, or they don't feel like opening up you know 3 or 4 accounts, right, going back to your to your family member story about having right, more deposits than the FDIC limit. So our product also in the back end basically will slice up the deposit into 247 K chunks to make sure it's fully insured at all times. And behind the
that's
scenes,
good.
it technically moves it to different banks. And so, B of A or Regions or Truist or whomever can be on the back end that actually hold the deposits each night. So, um, again, it goes back to just try to help the customer. And so we saw an opportunity where we felt like really our old firms weren't serving the needs fully of small and medium businesses here, um, you know, uh, here in the U.S. And what we find is a lot of our customers, will move their interest from, call it 1.5 to 2% interest, perhaps on an operating account at the current bank, and then our current product pays 3.9%, and so it's basically a way to kind of double interest, but still having the access to your funds. And so,
Okay,
what we
cool.
tell customers is don't view it as an investment account. It's really just trying to optimize the cash that's already in your business, and it's just trying to make sure that you earn a fair return.
Yeah, so you're playing shuffleboard. You're
Yeah,
playing
we
shuffleboard, making sure it's in the right place
at the right
for the money
time.
to make the money and then be back where it needs to be so it could be liquid and employed.
Yeah, we like to say that we're trying to make sure customers can earn a fair return, and we think our version of it is the kind of the easiest path to that fair return. It only takes about 10 minutes to sign up. The account is funded the next day, and then again, the customers can have the sweep going where it sweeps every week, or they can turn it off and just kind of use it as a giant savings account. And we have customers who do both. Um, but back to your core question, running a small business, as you know, is a lot different than working in a large
Very
corporation. And
much.
so, it's the same points that I touched on of, um, you have a lot more flexibility in terms of, right, your day-to-day life and your kind of vision of what you want to build. But the other side of the coin is, the infrastructure won't be there, and the safety net of a large company, is not there. So
Yeah.
for your listeners, they're both great opportunities in terms of working in a large company or at a mid-sized company, or trying to start something on your own. Um, but it's definitely, different versions of kind of risk versus reward. And I think for a lot of people, it'll be, they'll be able to tell the right path by, kind of what's in their heart and in their heads. Most entrepreneurs, I've always felt like that they're a little bit different than than most people, and you know generally have a strong drive, and so they often want to try to solve the problem themselves. It's that, from my perspective, that's what I find is a little bit different about folks who want to start their own business.
Yeah. Which oftentimes being that I want to solve this problem and a bigger organization does not work. Actually, most time it doesn't work because there are organizations, Amazon, Apple, I work for both those. They want to say we love problem solvers, but what they really want to say is we love problem solvers in their vertical, right?
Yeah.
Like just, you can solve all the problems between left and right here. But if you don't go too far to the left, that's someone else's problem solving area. And I think that's what's great about startups and smaller businesses is you can really employ people to a certain degree to like, hey, listen, try to see the holistic picture. I always say that I employ leaders. right? And I want autonomy amongst everybody because I want them to be the master of their own universe. You see a
Right.
problem, let's fix a problem, right? And let's move forward. Don't wait for your boss or manager to say, "Hey, that's a good idea. Let's fix that." And you're like, "No, you fix it," and then you tell them you fixed it. And
Yeah.
so we try to have that. And I tell folks when we come on, we don't hire that frequently. I mean, maybe we hire at this rate, we're like one or two people every, month or so, every other month or so, right? We're adding a new person. But when I bring them on, I always tell them, hey, listen, this is a room full of individuals, right, who are working for a common direction. I like that about the smaller companies. But, my one thought process when you were talking, Corey, that I wanted to get back to was that do you feel, from your perspective, that being in the control space that you are, knowing your company, being behind the wheel, do you feel more confident and more stable than you would say if you were working for a larger company? Right. Do you like, I'm driving. I know what's going on in my business. You had a big bank, you don't know about these high risk adjustable mortgage backed loans. You don't know what's going on over there. You're just in the customer service department. And so do you
Yeah.
feel more in control of your destiny?
Yeah. No, that's a great question. I mean, you are by definition, and to the point, at a smaller firm, you have a much broader view of what's happening, and so it's really proof point that it is literally driven by everything that your team is doing that day, right, that week, that year.
Mhm.
So yeah, I mean, you're certainly in more control. I think I think also though, what you look for in your team, I think, are actually similar characteristics. To your point, I think looking for solutions oriented people, and that could be a manager or that could be kind of an individual contributor. The fact that this solutions oriented really works in both worlds. And so,
Mm,
not everyone has that personality type, but
yeah.
what I found is those that type at least can thrive in in both worlds. To your point on, I think there is a trade off, right? There's more control in a smaller business, but like I was describing, that safety net is certainly much smaller, and it's generally provided by the founders. Right, you gave a great example of how you needed to fund the payroll out of your own pocket until the next funding round came and closed. And so, that is similar. And so, I think it takes a certain level of, I don't know if it's a different view of risk or risk tolerance, but,
Yeah.
right. Even my own example, I gave up, a quite lucrative banking career, to start our own firm. But I think I did it for the right reasons, which is, I could combine, one, just a little bit of like practical savings, right, from working so hard for all those years, and some knowledge, right, that I learned right in the bank of, you know, fairly unique knowledge in the different groups that I worked in, um, with, a willingness and an appetite to start a new firm and to try to solve problems. And so I think a lot of people would view that as, a giant risk and one that's not worth taking. I kind of took a step back and said, if I don't do this now, I probably won't do it because, right, I'd get too close to retirement and it'd be too risky for my family. And so,
Yeah.
um, I basically just took a step back, partially probably driven by COVID, which, I've heard has happened to a lot of folks. And I was like, well, to me, it's almost too risky to not try this. Like I have to do it. And so, I think it's something in your mind where it switches, and, you know, um, basically exploring what you can become, right, is a great driver. So, of all the negative things that happen in COVID, I think that is a huge positive for our country and the world, is allow people to take a step back and think a bit more about, you know, what do you want to do, right? What do you want to be? So I think it was helpful for that aspect to try to, kind of reset some mindsets.
No, I agree. And I mean, I look at how I was pre-COVID. Like I was a 15 plus hour, a day CEO, board member of a healthcare company, right?
Mhm.
Just every day losing my mind, grinding, trying to make it to that 100 million valuation. And it was, oh man, it was a horrible life. Okay, it was fun. I had a good time during it. Like you don't really see outside your blinders when you're running down the horse race. But now I just take a completely different approach to life. I work a reasonable level of hard, right? I commit myself a reasonable amount of time in
Mhm.
the day, but I also I focus on being a dad. Like I'm a dad since COVID, right? I've had two kids since the kickoff of COVID, and so I
Yeah,
started
right.
focusing way more on that, and that's just more important to me, right? I'm like at the end of my life already. I'm like trying to jump there and tallying what I found to be valuable, and career aspirations and achievements will definitely be there, right? Those have been fun things and I love those. But also, I'm like, are my kids gonna like me? Are we? What's my relationship with them going to be like? Or are they gonna? What are they gonna say at my eulogy? Like, oh, this
Yeah.
guy was never around, or hey, he was there for my tennis matches. And so those are the things that I have started focusing on. I think a lot of people post COVID have started thinking the same thing.
That's great. I mean, it's a challenge, and to be honest, I'm probably not the best person to speak about it because I'm probably a workaholic, so that's not a great starting point. But I agree with everything that you say, and it is something that professionals have to work through, and to be honest, it can be quite difficult in some of the hard charging industries, both the startup world, really just being kind of any entrepreneur or small business owner, all the way to right investment banking, attorneys. There's several fields
Yeah,
that have a huge work effort. But ultimately to your point, I mean, it's what matters in life is friends and family. And that's who's going to stick with you through thick or thin. And while you can have great colleagues and great relationships at work, it's not like your current firm is going to stick with you your entire life. And you know just an anecdotal story that I think may resonate is, I had a coworker one time, I remember, and this was before the crisis, and so we were just working on a normal deal. um, I can't remember if it was when we were working on buying AG Edwards or not, but anyways, so one of my um, coworker was about 10 years older, and it was his third child, and I still remember it to this day. He skipped a birthday party to keep working on the deal, and we were working over a Saturday, which also happens quite a bit in banking. And I remember saying to myself, I'll never let that happen. I'll never skip an important event, and it is tough because I understand the personality again. Right, I'm a very driven person, but that's another thing that's helpful of being able to step away sometimes from banking and some of that really intense culture is, was that deal going to die if he would have stepped away for 4 hours to go to his child's birthday party? No, it would have been completely fine. Right. I was there. I could have stepped up um, and, and done more. And again, I can't remember if I offered to or not. But to your point, you have to draw those lines. And again, I think COVID has been helpful in hopefully bringing those lines, a bit closer. Again, I'm probably always going to be a workaholic, and so my version of work life balance is probably different than than
yeah.
others. But again, that's something that you have to find yourself, and I love the fact that a lot of people can find happiness and in a totally different ratio of that work life balance. So again, I think it's definitely key, and I think firms also have kind of moved away from the crazy culture of working 80-hour weeks, which again I used to do for you know
They kind of have
year
to
after year.
because the new generation coming up, they some of them I'm sure are all for it, but And most of them aren't about 80 hours a week. They have to figure out how to do 80 hours and 40 or 50 hours.
Yeah.
Because I mean, my mentality is I always work, therefore I can choose when not to work. Right. And
Yep.
so I'm always working. All right. Wake up Saturday morning, wake up Sunday morning, I work. All right. Kids go to bed. I'm like, you know what? I need to look at that report real quick because they sent it to me at the end of the night. I need to look at the report. And so when I choose to not work, it doesn't matter to me at all. And that's one thing there's one big thing that I've been focusing on with telehelping since the, coming out of COVID, because it was in 2020 when the company was founded,
Hmm.
where I was like, I want to be able to have a company who runs by itself, grows by itself, and like solves its problems by itself. Right.
Right.
And then I just become more of a novelty. Right. I'm a nice to have in a problem solving situation because you'll probably get a better result. However, there will be a decent result otherwise. And so that's why, my wife, who was involved with the company when it first was founded, right? After we had kids and everything, she's like, "Oh, I really would like to come back working at telehelping." Right? I was
Hmm.
like, "Wow, let me think about it." Right? And so she wanted something to do. And I came back to her like, 30 seconds later. Actually, no, it's a horrible idea. And she's like, "Well, why?" I was like, "Well, because what if you like are in some important leadership role and I want to go on vacation?" And so, right. And,
Hmm.
we're both on vacation. Now you have two critical pillars. Like, if I have a chair, right, you lose
Yeah.
one leg, right, but you can't lose two legs. I said,
Right.
"No, you need to do something else." So I was
Yeah.
like, I can't have you because I like being able to step away. And I'm like, all right, I know that I'm not there, but I know things are happening that needs to happen. And
Yeah.
so, and I think that's just what people are trying to, and a lot of our followers that are listening, and which I thought was so incredibly important for you to share, is a lot of them are identifying as the hustle culture or entrepreneurs in some regard. So they're in this balance between like, well, I have a job, but I have a passion that makes me money, or I have a job and I have a side hustle that they're trying to grow to replace it.
Yeah.
Um, Curiosity, I have my own opinions, but when did you decide it was the time to like, all right, well, we've been talking about this firm with you guys, your co-founders, like maybe we have a client, maybe you don't have a client. When did you make that decision to jump? How was that made?
Yeah. Well, I jumped early is the short answer. I was lucky enough that I had a senior enough role at Wells Fargo where I could basically negotiate my exit. And so I recognize that's not a normal path. So for me, I was able to exit and plan for that, including right saving up, you know, basically a nest egg. So um for me, I ultimately funded, so we bootstrapped for almost the entire first year, um, and the vast majority of those funds were my own. So that was probably a unique path, and a bit different because with a fintech, the cost to build is not something that you can just snap your fingers and do it. So, you know, we, we drained cash for a while, um, so having that was important. So I guess in terms of advice, I would say, I think it depends on the type of firm. If you're going to be a service oriented firm where it's ultimately a lot of your own brain power, then you can leave early, right, without a lot of capital. You can start on the side and basically, right, use some of those extra hours to start the path. If it's more product focused, or something that takes a lot of development like a SaaS company, then, on some of those, if the product is a wide ranging product, you often have to kind of make some hard decisions of like, well, I really need to shift because
Yeah.
it's difficult to do things kind of halfway. So, you ultimately have to decide, now's the time to do it. Um, the last thing I would say is, it's worth doing the research before you jump. It's worth having those conversations with customers to understand, are you truly solving a problem that they need solved, or have you thought of an idea and now you're searching for, right, a problem to match it. And so even with what we built, now that we're past the point, we can say we should have done more customer research to know exactly what we should have built. before. And so that's the only advice I would give in terms of people who are thinking about, I've had this idea for years, or is it a true problem? And I think most of the time they probably are, but it's worth doing as much kind of research and customer communication prior to jumping, right? Because then you may say, oh, I thought this was going to be a hit with whatever it is, restaurant owners, but come to find out it's actually very, very interesting to real estate owners because
Yeah.
of my right multi-account options or what have you. So that'd be my advice, because everyone listens to podcasts about people who are successful. They don't listen to the podcast of the 8 others who tried something but maybe didn't right plan it out all the way, or right have had bad luck, because right in the end, luck is actually a decent sized driver. So I would say planning ahead and doing some of that customer research can narrow the path of the various possibilities, and make sure that you kind of stay on the fairway. And then in that way, all your hard work is higher likelihood of being on the fairway and getting closer to the goal.
No, yeah, you hit it there. Like you said, luck's a pretty heavy driver. And I mean, the mentality I have is, I've tried more than most people. I've failed more than most people have tried. Right. And so I've plenty of failed businesses that never saw the light of day. Right.
Yeah,
And then when you get a business going, you're bootstrapping it, which is a fun time. It's like staying alive long enough to get lucky. Right. So
yeah,
you're just like if I can stay in the sun long enough, maybe I'll catch the right amount of rays before this thing goes belly up, before it runs out of cash, right? And
yeah,
that was telehelping's one of the biggest things that it faced. It was like, and even with the previous one, Octiva, like we didn't get our huge relationship with HCA. If you don't know who HCA is, it's the largest hospital company in the world,
yeah,
second to the VA, right? If we didn't get a contract with them, it would have been a stain on the carpet, right?
yeah,
Barely. And the same thing would tell them if we didn't get back office relationships with financial advisor companies as strategic partners, right?
that's
If
right.
we didn't get those, right, we would just be a handful of nickels and a couple of virtual assistants hanging out. And so you just have to wait long enough to meet the right person, and then if it's a long sales cycle, try not to die during that sales cycle,
Yeah,
and then when it comes, it comes.
yeah,
But Cory, I think that you've been able to provide an immense amount of perspective for folks. I think as we move forward in this world that we're existing in right now, we have a multitude of things that could push us into another crisis financially, right? It's push us into another war, which could push us into another crisis, right? And so I think a lot of people are asking themselves, like, to be safe or to be risky. Like, do I do my own thing, or do I hang out and roll my dice at one of the big firms? And so I think you've been able to provide perspective on that. So I appreciate your time today.
yeah. I'm glad to do it. And again, I appreciate the invite, and I'd be happy to join again. In a year or so, just to see how things are going and
That's the
reconnect.
plan. That's the plan. I'm hoping next time, because this is our first year. I'm hoping next year to cycle back through folks, especially folks like the younger companies that have been in at a year and a half to see where they are. So
Yeah,
looking forward to having you back on maybe
great.
next time, because I've done this once already, is have you back on with your partners, and we'll do a kind of a round table
Sure.
podcast. So that'd be really great to have.
I'd
Corey,
be glad
thank
to
you
do
so
it.
much time, sir. Be
Yeah, thank
well.
you,
Enjoy your
Jody.
day.
Great. Thank you.
This video was brought to you by our official sponsor, Telehelping. Need support for your business? Telehelping connects you with top-tier remote staff to help you streamline operations and fuel growth. Go to telehelping.com and get started today.